godmorgen alle sammen. Det er dejligt at være her. Godmorgen til ministeren. Børge, det er rart at se dig her. Of course, I'm one of the international guests, really. So I have been asked to speak in English, which I will do. But it's always nice to be in Oslo, in Norway. I feel very welcome here, and I'm delighted to be here. As you know, I wasn't always in the NGO sector, which you've just been reminded. But what attracted me to Save the Children was the insistence in Save the Children that whatever happens in the world, it should be seen from this perspective. 100 centimeter, 120, or even smaller. This is how we see the world, from a child's perspective. And that's a good thing, because you start asking new questions when you do that, and you start seeing new things. I've had the opportunity to travel and meet many, many children in my time as CEO of Save the Children International. I have met children in refugee camps in Greece. I have met children living in the streets in India, living in drought-affected areas in Ethiopia, and many, many other places. And what I always see is that side by side to the horrors that these children are exposed to, I see so many countless examples of impressive resilience, the remarkable capability to cope with change. Children have hope even in the hardest of circumstances. And what I believe is that that hope should give us hope and inspire us. Luckily, we've all been children. We know how it feels. And I believe that anyone who has ever been close to children, they have experienced that natural aptitude for change. And change at an enormous speed is actually the very essence of being a child. Never do our bodies change more rapidly, our brains develop quicker, never do we learn better or heal faster than when we are children. So even though children should not be allowed to develop and grow up in instability, we also have to understand that they are capable of changing. In many ways, they're built better to do that than adults. Let me be absolutely clear when I say that. Children are the most vulnerable in crisis of conflict, poverty, or disasters. And we have to do whatever it takes to protect children. But to succeed in doing just that, we also have to identify and understand the remarkable ability for children to survive and cope, and focus on nurturing and amplifying just that. So now you might be asking yourself, why am I talking about this when I've actually been asked to talk about civil society's role in international development? Well, friends, I do that because I think this perspective actually brings something to us. It brings a perspective that we can change, and we should have hope. And I bring that perspective with me when I lead 25,000 people working in 120 countries with a mandate to change the world into a better place for every last child. And I'm inspired to lead these 25,000 people, to lead Save the Children in a world that is definitely changing. And I really want to ensure that we remember that when children are resilient, then so should we be in the NGO sector and in civil society. What I want for us in civil society is not only to be fit for purpose in 2016, but also be fit for purpose in 2030. And to do so, we have to learn, we have to adapt, and we have to be dynamic and nimble enough to work effectively in different contexts and changing environment. And the sooner we understand that, the better we will be fit for purpose in the future. So what is it that we have to understand in civil society? We have to understand that the only constant that we know is change. And over the last decades, we have actually seen big changes in the world. Actually, it's a better world for children. Children have experienced enormous progress. Millions more children survive their 5th birthday. Millions more children are in school. But we also have to realize that there are threats rising to these gains. What we are seeing in today's world, and Børge was talking about it in a very passionate way, is that international norms and standards are being challenged, and that conflicts are again on the rise. We are seeing horrifying attacks on children as a strategy of war. Also, many have been excluded from the progress that has benefited many children. And what we also know is that the children that have been excluded, they have not been excluded by chance. They are the children that the world has systematically forgotten to help. They are systematically discriminated against, and that actually deprives them from the right to education, to health, and to protection. These facts challenge us in a new way. Børge was talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. And when we think about it, it was actually amazing that the world leaders managed to come together in September 2015 and agree of something so fundamental as these goals. But we have to remember that they actually also binds us. And it is worth remembering what the new, most fundamental change is in the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, this most fundamental change is that we have stood up and we have given a pledge to this world's people and children that we will leave no one behind. We will leave no one behind is easy to say. It is very difficult to do. And it is the to-do thing that we have to start now. And in order to do that, we need to work in a different way. And I want to present to you 3 changes that I think that we as civil society need to understand, and not only understand, but respond to if we are to achieve the goals of leaving no one behind. First principle or challenge: geography matters less. What does that mean? It means that political and economic power is shifting. What globalization does, of course, is that it breaks down borders. Digitalization globalizes activism. People can effectively come together across borders, and they can mobilize against injustice and for change. All that is great. But what we're also seeing is that digitalization can be the cause of abuse. You've had the recent dark room sexual assault case here in Norway, and that reminds us. But what we're also seeing with digitalization and globalization is that when we talk about the north-south divide, maybe it's not so useful any longer. Of course, I get that there are still obvious differences and injustices between the global north and the global south, but when we analyze to identify where the most deprived children are, we will see that we actually have pockets within every country where we can find very deprived children. For example, we increasingly see child rights being violated in Europe, where we stand. We see that have and have-nots exist within our borders, and we see that children's rights that are clearly enshrined in the Child Rights Conventions are being violated even in Europe. We see groups of children that live in developed European countries that are not receiving basic things such as education, health, and protection that they are actually entitled to. An example, the refugee crisis that we have now seen in Europe. For Save the Children, that has basically meant that we needed to learn new things and scale up our work in Europe, both within our domestic programs, but also in actually very similar ways to the way we work in completely other countries. This has been hard. We had to learn new things, but it just underlines that when you suddenly see that children are deprived in your own part of the world, you need to rethink, you need to scale up, and you need to do better. And one thing that actually has remained the same and has reminded us is that our role as civil society is exactly as it was before and as it has always been. Our role as civil society everywhere in the world, and that's a point, is to constantly hold duty bearers to account wherever they are. And as watchdogs, we are mobilizing, organizing, and partnering for change. We are constantly on guard for violations of rights, whilst at the same time walk alongside local, district, and national authorities to strengthen their own skills. That is our role. And the rights-based approach that we have talked about for so many years, perhaps that is even more important than it was before, and perhaps that is a clear consequence of that fundamental new thing that we had in the Sustainable Development Goals of leaving no one behind. So what I'm trying to say is that the Leave No One Behind agenda is essentially a strong human rights agenda. Every human being is a person in itself, and every human being have rights. And as civil society, we will make sure that our programming on the ground, wherever that may be, is contributing to just that. Contributed to saying that every human being have rights and the Sustainable Development Goals. And that we will do that by bringing the voices of the most deprived, the unheard, the invisible of this world to the table. That is our pledge, and that is what we need to do. So, even though our role is basically the same, we always have to adapt our ways of working to a changing geography. For us, that means that we have to have geographical presence everywhere. We can no longer just be northern organizations operating in the global south. No, what we have thought in Save the Children, and I think that goes for many civil society organizations, is that, of course, we are still an international non-governmental organization, which means we still run country offices. But that's not the end game for us. No, the end game for us is that we will have independent civil society organizations in every country. Whether they are Save the Children, branded or not, working for children's rights on the ground, that is where we should be. And we are trying to do that in Save the Children. Save the Children India, for example, is now a nationally owned civil society organization with Indian staff and supporters. They run domestic programs like we do in Norway or in Denmark, the same thing. And the same has been the case for Save the Children South Africa, Honduras, Save the Children Jordan that we just changed into a local NGO, Save the Children Fiji. And what we are doing right now is that we are changing Save the Children Colombia, Philippines, and Indonesia. They are in the process of leaving country office status to become member countries that have their own brand on the ground. And this is where we need to go. Because what we have to have is civil society organizations that don't just come from the north and act in the south, but civil society organizations on the ground, which gives them the legitimacy, the access, and the mobilization force that I believe that an external NGO can never earn in a country. No matter how long we work, we will not get that status. So that is what we have to do now, and that is what Save the Children is working on. So we have a situation now where we don't have any Save the Children offices that is merely mobilizing money to country programs in poor countries. That's the old model. We are still fighting for child rights within our borders. Our domestic programs are growing. We are dealing with child poverty, unlawful detention, trafficking, sexual abuse, and much, much more. And our capacity to advocate and campaign for change also in rich and middle-income countries have been strengthened, because it is obvious that change is needed everywhere. So that was the first thing we have to adjust to. North and South should not be understood in the old ways, but in the new ways. Secondly, the cause matters more. What does that mean? Well, I am actually shocked and horrified by the way children are treated today. If you challenge yourself, you should read the report of the Special Representative of Children in Armed Conflict that the UN is doing. It is horrifying. It is like reading a horror story. And what I keep wondering about is why the world is not more outraged. How can it be that we are not more outraged by the fact that a baby only a month old is tortured, that girls as young as 6 are being raped, as boys aged 10 are forced to become child soldiers, that a boy dies of wounds because the hospital has just been bombed? This is happening every day around the world. Because what we are seeing is that the tactics of war are becoming more intense and more brutal. And we just can't accept civilians paying the price in war, and also, which is a new thing, becoming deliberate weapons of warfare. But today, we seem to be doing just that. Aleppo is one symbol, Yemen another, and now we have northern Nigeria as a third. And that leads me to the increasing importance of the role of the civil society in joining strength. I am the firm believer of the fact we simply cannot, in our times, we can't do anything on our own. We need to come together across organizations, across sectors, across borders to make a real difference. We have to stop thinking within and working with the north-south divide. I've talked about that. We have the differences, of course, but we have to stop that. But we also have to create a movement of millions behind our cause. A movement of millions that are working for this change I'm talking about, but that also requires a mind shift in ourselves. We need to move from being agencies of civil society to actually becoming fellow activists. We should all identify ourselves as activists, in the sense that we need to see positive change and believe in a better future, and are willing to stand up for that as well. I believe that history will judge us based on our actions and lack of it. And we are seeing right now an erosion of norms. We need to come together. The third thing I want to say is that the most deprived matters most. The increasing inequality that divides us, denies us and denies life possibilities need to be focused. We are seeing increased inequalities in this world, and we must insist on breaking down those inequalities and reaching every last child. We need to understand that every last child is not only poor, no, they are, as I said before, systematically discriminated against. And these children desperately need the change that I'm talking about. If we really want to leave no one behind and reach every last child, we need to address the underlying causes of what is happening to these children. And there is a need right now for civil society to deliver on people's entitlements in rich and in poor states. Organizations like us, civil society, have to provide healthcare, education, and other needs when it is needed. It can be in crisis, in failed states, but it can also be in our own countries. And when we do that, we always have to strive to do it as sustainable as possible. Not creating parallel structures in the countries we work in, but work with local authorities and governments. I will conclude. The civil society organizations fit for the future have to be as resilient and good as changing as children are. We have to invest in understanding the different and changing contexts that we are facing and organize ourselves in a way that allows us to respond effectively to new challenges. We will have to be even more diverse. We will need to work together in new constellations. I really commend Norad for focusing on the changing role of civil society. We have not found all the answers, but we are looking to find some answers. And there's no doubt in my mind that the importance of civil society will only increase in the future, despite the challenges, despite the shrinking space, threats that I'm sure this report will address. I'm also very eager to work with all of you to developing a civil society fit for the future. And I hope and I'm certain that today's conference will bring new ideas, new perspectives of working together to reach every last child. Thank you very much.